run by Dr. Gerard Henderson, a creature who works for the Sydney Morning Herald. They have shares in his so-called Sydney Institute and so on and so forth. But the Sydney Institute is also, interestingly, they want the Muslims to have Australian values. They want them to conform to the marketplace. They want them to accept tolerance. But what is the Sydney Institute famous for? Full, total and complete support for Israeli state policy. Interesting, isn't it? A bit of a funny one there. We've also seen the Liberal Party, John Howard personally, running a scam on immigration back in 1988. It was a good one. He said that he was deeply concerned. He put up a thing called the One Australia idea. Deeply concerned, he said, about the pace of immigration to Australia from Asia. He didn't say he was against immigration to Australia from Asia. He said he was merely concerned with the pace. But the way the media ran it is a lot of people out here who were very worried about whether Australia is eventually going to be absorbed into a Southeast Asian trade zone might have assumed that John Howard was talking to them, was saying something to them. And some speaker before raised the matter of the kids overboard affair. We all remember that one. We decide, said the Prime Minister, who comes to Australia and how they get here. But just about every one of those people off the Tampa is now here. So he decided, didn't he? And now we see the latest scam. They're saying that they want these nice Muslim folks to conform to what they call Australian values. But which values? Your values? Or the people who Professor Fraser talked about last night, the professional managerial class values? Which values? Ours or the ruling class? Well, I don't think it's my values. I think it's their values. In fact, I think they're going to have a little trouble teaching the Muslims to be tolerant of the gay and lesbian Mardi Gras. On that point, I agree with them, right? Mrs. Hanson, whatever else may be said for her, said recently that she thought that Mr. Howard, Mr. Costello had listened to her. Well, I'd be a cynic here and say, yeah, they did, and then they decided to scam you. And what they're running now, if you like, is their own version of the vision of Australia. I have here a magazine cover of a government-produced magazine put out for Australia Day. And this magazine cover, I don't know if you folks can properly see it, but you see an African child and an Arab child and a Chinese-type child, I think a child from Central Asia somewhere, and a child of European origin. And for the purpose, and only for this purpose I'll use this phrase, wrapped up in a piece of cloth and called Australian. Okay. This is a very interesting line. Now, according to some people who talk very, very much, and this is something that, in my view, has arisen directly out of the Cronulla affair and is now being talked at very widely in multicultural circles and television and talkback and so on and so forth, there are two competing visions, if you like, of what it is those who object to immigration and multiculturalism are talking about. The government's line, I suppose, is that we wrap everybody up in a piece of cloth and we say that they all speak English and we say that they all do some particular thing and swear some oath, and this makes them an Australian. I regret to say that there are some people who call themselves Australian patriots who also say the same thing. Unfortunately, it's either one or the other. You heard the phrase last night from Professor Fraser that being a member of a nationality was a matter of community, language and blood. That was the view of the men who saw your nation born. You could not necessarily be an Australian. There were many qualifications, and even, yes, there were some exceptions by citizenship and so on, we know that, some quite interesting and significant exceptions. But there was a 99.9% rule was that to be an Australian you had to be a person of European descent. You can't really have an identity in Australia if it is one that can be changed by an act of citizenship. This is a matter that is now simmering away, that has arisen precisely out of the issues of Cronulla. Who is an Australian and what is an Australian? You have two choices. Either an Australian is anyone who arrives here, wraps himself up in a piece of cloth and swears an oath, Or an Australian is a person descended, if you like, by blood, by ancestry, from those people who are of European origin. It's a very, very hard choice. And there are many people who may call themselves patriots today who tomorrow I and any number of you may call enemy, because it is something that must be defined. Right now across Australia this issue will be defined. It will be defined for you. The matters in Cronulla do not come in isolation. They come as part of a process. Right now immigration is linked to the stain of contract labour and cheap labour and displacement. From the Sudanese folks in Newcastle and Coffs Harbour and Warrnambool and Toowoomba, through to Arabs and Muslim people in Kilcoy and Shepparton and Dubbo and Griffith and Young, to Vietnamese contract workers recently slotted into Charleville, and I believe also in Albany in Western Australia, and a new scheme that's being operated in Murray Bridge in South Australia. I'm not sure who's operating that. The ordinary Australian working man is going to be attacked. They have stripped you of your unions under the guise that they're all run by red idiots. They've stripped you of your workplace rules, and now they're going to strip you of your job because they'll find someone to do it cheaper than you will. Everything that your forefathers built will be taken from you. So the very hard issue of who is an Australian will in part be decided for you in the struggle that is now beginning in our country, not just for our identity survival, but even for our personal survival. Now some people might say to me, or to people like me, or something like that, well, why would you go to certain places where, you know, there might be contract labour or asylum seekers or other similar people there, and why would you want to go and agitate or cause trouble or so forth, or be seen in some negative way or something like that? Why would you want to do that? Well, I believe, my fellow Australians, that there is a very, very positive lesson that does come out of all of the ups and downs and rights and wrongs of Cronulla. And I'll say it to you in a single sentence. It is my heartfelt belief that it is about time the white Australian agitates back. Thank you.